No doubt the big news we've been talking about all morning is that second healthcare worker in Dallas testing positive for Ebola. The results back from the lab here in Austin early this morning. We've got Dr. Kumar here to talk a little bit about that. Thank you. We've just been chatting about it quite a bit. We've touched on it before with you in the last few weeks about how scary this is.
It has been, and I was just commenting to you that, in the 15 years that I've been reporting on medicine, both here as well as on the radio, I mean, Ebola is probably one of the most virulent, fatal viruses that I've come across, that I've heard of. Certainly we've had scares with the bird flu and the swine flu and the epidemic flu, which should not be trivialized. That kills 50,000 people a year. And so you put the numbers in perspective.
We talk about. Sure.
I mean, there are a lot of deadly viruses out there, but as to how the fatality rate with this and the destruction that Ebola does to the human body and how infectious it is, it's certainly one of a kind, one of a lifetime kind of virus.
Okay, so to that aside, to walk that back a little bit here, the numbers certainly in the United States and what we've seen, all this attention for a handful of cases. So that should tap down a little bit of the panic.
Sure, and that's the main thing. I mean, the point we want to get across is that I agree with the reports that are coming out that fear and panic are unnecessary. What is required is an abundance of caution. Right. From the people and the stakeholders to really to put all their feet on the ground, like the CDC is saying, let's get the A-team down there,
right.
Let's get everybody down there and block this off before it spreads any further. Because as we've talked about before, there's no effective therapy for this. And really the only way to quelch Ebola is quarantine and to prevent the spread. And so once you prevent the spread, then there's no further point to spread through the population. Right. So you really have to quarantine, isolate, and that's how you treat it. And so it seems like they're taking the appropriate steps to avoid that. And a silver lining to this, the second Ebola case that was detected, it was self-reported. The systems that they had in place in which people that were potentially exposed to the Ebola victim were isolated and were checking their own temperatures, and that's what this nurse did. She checked her own temperature. She said, I'm having a low-grade fever. Let's go check for Ebola. And she tested positive. Now she's isolated.
Right.
And so the time from which she was infectious, meaning when she was febrile, and the exposure she's had to anybody else has been extremely limited.
Right. Because
the systems in place did work in this case.
That's what we need because, like you said, drugs and treatments, although certainly we hope they're in the pipeline, they're pretty far down the line for this current, these cases we're seeing in the country right now.
That's right. They're not going to be immediately available.
Right.
I mean, we talk, usually the medicines that are available, you hear a lot of talk about it and chatter on the press before they come out and are available, open on the wide market. And as quiet as it's been about this one medicine that's available, I would have just assumed, and that doctor that was the healthcare worker that was in Liberia that received that experimental medicine, we haven't heard any more about that. Mm-hmm. And so it seems like that's further on down the line. The idea that you could quickly manufacture a vaccine, test it safely, and implement it widely in the population is not optimistic. The blood transfusion that one physician is offering now has been tried before. In previous outbreaks, they've taken blood from Ebola survivors and transfused Ebola victims, and they've worked better than not.
My understanding is Dr. Brantley, the doctor you're talking about, did that for the nurse.
Yes.
And of course, we've heard she's doing well. He wasn't a match for Mr. Duncan.
Right, and so you got to be careful about those blood reactions, right? So you got to be selective about it. And even in our own town, we physicians, I've received emails from the head of the Seton system, John Hellerstadt, and the head of the HCA system, St. David's, David Ronstedt, that the hospital systems here in town are prepared. It's not they're being very proactive. They're not waiting to hear that Ebola is coming down I-35. That there are already systems in place here to identify Ebola, potential Ebola exposure, and to isolate them. And so, particularly here in Austin, that we should know and feel at least comfortable that all the stakeholders aren't sitting on the sidelines waiting for some bad outbreak, that they're stepping out in front of it, that they're identifying people that are potentially at risk, and we're going to be as prepared as we possibly can.
And we'll say that for communities probably all across this country.
That's true.
We go for it.
If we're doing it, I bet you others are as well.
Great to have this information from you this morning, Dr. Kumar. We appreciate it. As always, if you have a question for Dr. Kumar, and maybe another topic we talk about at another time, you can email us at askdrkumar@gmail.com. We'll be right back.